Davis. This is his third year with us, and we're already in talks with him coming back again next year, teaching and preaching on the home, family, and relationships. So we're going to get right into it because he needs a good 45 minutes to get through and do what he's doing this morning, okay? So we are glad Dr. Davis is with us. We'll get into the 11 o'clock hour and go from there, okay? All right, Dr. Davis, come on.
All right. Thank you, Pastor. Good morning to everybody. It's good to be back in Yorktown, Virginia. When I think of Yorktown, Virginia, I always think about my sermon on strategy for victory in spiritual warfare. I haven't given that one here, Pastor, but that's where I talk about the Revolutionary War, and I actually got to see the place where it took place when I was here last year, where the surrender took place. So anyway, it's good to be with you again. And I'm speaking on the subject, Don't Stop Communicating. And this story that I'm going to share really convicted me. Deborah Brown wrote this story in a national magazine. She said, I was balancing a bag of groceries in one arm. I pushed the kitchen door open. Meredith, my 11-year-old, followed me, talking a mile a minute. Mom, she said, as I set everything down, you are not listening to me. I am listening, I said, putting my brain on mental rewind. You were telling me about your math. Anybody ever do that? Put your brain on mental rewind. You were telling me about your math test tomorrow. Before that, you were saying you didn't like PE. My daughter sighed dramatically, then continued speaking to the back of my head. I put the groceries away, put the water on for spaghetti, checked my email, all the while trying to keep up with my daughter's monologue. That's nice. 2 hours later, my husband Alan's car keys clanked into the tray by the back door. He began giving me the full rundown of the day's events at his real estate office. I put more spaghetti and sauce on for his dinner, heated the peas in the microwave, sliced some bread. He said, I got the tickets for the game. Really, I mumbled while I was really thinking, where is Meredith? Has she finished her homework? It's getting late. She needs to get ready for bed soon. By the time I'd cleaned up in the kitchen, Alan was in the family room, sitting in his easy chair across from our daughter Meredith. He looked at our daughter, and said, how was PE today, honey? Fine. Her eyes never left her book. Did you play volleyball or run? She turned the page. Answer me, sweetie. Finally, she looked up and said, answer what? My husband sighed, picked up his paper. You're just like your mother, he grumbled. You never listen. What are you talking about? I said. My husband's face flushed. It's true. When I'm talking, you're always doing other things. Cooking, answering your email, clearing the table. You say, but you don't hear half of what I say. Now Meredith, our daughter's doing it. Alan, doing two things at once is the only way I can get anything done around here. Just because I'm not looking at you doesn't mean I don't hear you. Well, half the time you're tuning me out. Well, we'll talk about it later. But we didn't. We both went to bed upset. Why didn't my husband get it? I was a busy person. Besides my job at the bank, I had to keep the house running, cook the meals, make sure our daughter got her homework done. I didn't have time to just listen. A few weeks later, Alan and I attended a weekend seminar on internet businesses. Neither of us had brought up the listening issue, but there was tension in the air. So I was more than a little surprised when Saturday's speaker at the seminar, a communications expert, introduced his topic for the morning, which was effective listening. I'd like everybody to try a simple exercise, he said. Could you please divide up in pairs? He pointed right at my husband and me and said, we will start here and I'll share more of that story later. Now, I don't know about you, but I love to read biographies. I think my favorite thing to read is biographies or autobiographies. I love those as well where somebody writes the story of their own life. If I were to ask you, where do you find the most biographical information about the Apostle Paul? If you know your Bible, I think you might say the book of Acts. If I were to ask you, where do you find the most autobiographical information about the Apostle Paul? If you know your New Testament well, I think you might actually say the book of 2 Corinthians. Many years ago, as a much younger pastor with lots of hair. I preached through the book of 2 Corinthians at my church. And to this day, 35 years later, there is one passage in 2 Corinthians that stands out in my mind as my favorite of the entire book. It is the passage where Paul really revealed his heart. It was a crying out passage. It was a cry from his heart. In most all of Paul's letters, he told us something about himself, but 2 Corinthians is by far the most personal of them all. We have no outward picture of the Apostle Paul, but 2 Corinthians is better. It is an inward picture of the Apostle Paul. I don't know whether I would have wanted to look like Paul looked on the outside or not, but I sure would like to look like he looked on the inside. Can I get an amen right there? Here is the heart of the Apostle Paul. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 11. It's on the screen in front of you. I want everybody read this out loud with me all together. Would you please? Here we go. O ye is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. Ye are not straitened in us, but ye are straitened in your own bowels. He says the restriction in communication between us is not from my side, it is from your side, Paul says. Keep reading, please, all together. Now for a recompense in the same, I speak as unto my children, be ye also enlarged. I said I'm speaking on the subject, don't stop communicating. Now there are two symbols that the Apostle Paul used in this passage. The symbols were the open mouth and the enlarged heart. Now I want you to get a picture of both of these in your mind. The open mouth is a symbol of full, open, complete, honest communication. And the enlarged heart is a picture of a man who loves those who won't love him. He loves those who criticize him. He is a man who keeps a reservoir of forgiveness available to draw from the very moment that it is needed. Now, I said I'm speaking on don't stop communicating, and I really just have one or 2 points here this morning. And the first main point is this: don't stop communicating with family members who reject you or criticize you or have a bad spirit or attitude toward you. Anybody have anybody like that? Maybe they reject, don't nod at me right now. Maybe it's the person right next to you, all right? Maybe they reject your beliefs or standards or both. Maybe it's a son. Maybe it is a daughter-in-law. Maybe it is a daughter or a son-in-law. Maybe it's a father or a mother-in-law or a father-in-law or a sister or a brother or grandparents. Now, you could say whatever you want to, but I want to tell you something. Rejection hurts. There are folks who say, well, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I want to tell you, words may hurt you worse than sticks and stones may hurt you. Now, I want to tell you, there are some very unlovely people in this world, but they need somebody to love them as well. There are some very unlovely people even in the church, not Central Baptist Church certainly, but the other church down the street. There are some unlovely people there, but they need somebody to love them as well. How easy it is for some people to fight, and how difficult it is for some people to communicate. In fact, sometimes it actually gets really humorous. This really happened at a convenience store in Mishawaka, Indiana, a number of years ago. 2 men walked in and were going to rob the clerk. Well, one of those men had written out the note telling what he was going to do. So he hands the clerk this note. telling her that he's going to rob her, but apparently didn't do a very good job writing the note. The clerk looked back at him and said to him, I don't really understand your note. I don't understand what it is you're wanting me to do. And the second guy standing there looks at the first guy and says, I told you that note didn't make any sense. I told you she would never figure it out. I told you we're not even going to get this place robbed. Turned around and walked out. They both walked out, never got the place robbed, simply because they really could not communicate. I want to tell you, you're going to accomplish anything in life, you're going to have to learn to communicate. If you're going to solve any problem, you're going to have to learn to communicate. Now, this verse, O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. I want to draw you a picture of this the way that I see it in my mind. All right? Here is your heart right here. Everybody looking at me now. All right? Here is your heart right here. Everybody has a few people in their heart. Some have a lot more than others. But what happens if some of these people in your heart start fighting, or misbehaving, or criticizing, or attacking us? Our normal human reaction is to restrict our heart and squeeze them out of it. That is it. What did Paul do? He did the very opposite of that. He enlarged his heart. Now, here's your heart again, all right? Let's pretend there's you and one other person right now in this heart. And y'all start fighting. And I have preached this before and actually got down and had a teenage guy come forward. I'm thinking about doing it right now. I'm looking at Brother Smithy's son over there thinking I maybe could whoop him if we had a fight right now. But I'm not sure of that. But do you know what? It takes more room. He's over there shaking his head no. Now that was a challenge, you know. I think the shaking the head is, what is this guy thinking about anyway? But anyway, it takes more room for two people to fight in your heart than it does for two people to just stand still and carry on a normal conversation. And you know what? The only way you can continue to have somebody else in your heart who is fighting with you is if you're willing to enlarge your heart. O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. Now, I want you to, I want to make sure you get this right here. All right, we're going to have some fun, okay? Here we go. All right? I want everybody, now you don't have to do this, but I hope you do, all right? I want everybody to look at me right now. Now I want you to put your hands out in front of you like this. All right, here we go. Everybody, get your arms out in front of you like this. All right, this is not spectator church. This is participator church. All right, now I want you to do this. Our mouth is open unto you. Everybody do that. All right. Our heart is enlarged. Now do this. Y'all look ridiculous. And I do too, and that's all right. You get the point. Our mouth is open unto you. Our heart is enlarged. It is a picture of full, open, honest communication, even with people that you have difficulty getting along with and communicating with. The heart of Jesus was big enough to take in the whole world. On the cross, he cried out, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And when Jesus comes into your heart, he wants to make your heart like his heart. Isn't it amazing how small some people's heart is in comparison to what it could be and what it should be? Read off the screen with me, would you please, all together? Your joy is determined by the size of your heart. In fact, the Apostle Paul said that in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 when he says, I wrote this same unto you, lest when I came I should have sorrow from them of whom I ought to rejoice, having confidence in you all, that my joy is the joy of you all. So he says here, joy is not just a single personal individual thing that you have all by yourself. Joy is primarily a corporate thing that involves other people. Now, get this, the breadth and extent of your ministry is determined by the size of your heart. The breadth and extent of your ministry is determined by whether, when you have a problem with somebody, whether your heart shrinks or whether your heart enlarges itself. You've got to have both God and others in your heart if you're going to reconcile them to one another. In fact, in 2 Corinthians 5:18, he said, God hath reconciled us to himself by Jesus Christ and hath given to us. Who is that? That's you. That's me. He's given to you and me. God has handed to you and me the ministry of reconciliation. When you're dealing with two people at odds with one another, you have to have both of them in your heart. Many people, even Christians, unwittingly have the ministry of alienation instead of the ministry of reconciliation, because their heart is not big enough to include somebody else or to include both sides of a dispute. A father and a son are fighting. Who can help? Maybe the mother, if she has room for both of them in her heart. I heard a story that I think happened probably in the 1800s. A young man had a fight with his father. And angrily the father, he said to his father, I'm just going to leave. And the father angrily looked back and said, then you just leave. And the son said, and if I do, I probably will never see you again. And the father with angry words said, and I hope you never do see me again. And the boy packed his stuff and left. And years passed, and the mother tried to keep in touch with the son, and occasionally she would hear something from him, and the father would have nothing to do with the boy. And finally the mother got sick, and they got word to the boy that your mother is going to die. If you want to see your mother, you need to get here. And the boy got there, and the father was standing next to the bed. And the boy walked in and would not look at his father, would not acknowledge he's even standing there. He walked to the other side of the bed. And the mother with joy greeted her son. Son, it's so good to see you, son. I have missed you. It had been so many years, and the tears ran down her face. And the mother looks at the husband and says, honey, won't you speak to our boy? The father looks at her and won't say a word. She looks at her son and she says, son, why don't you speak to your dad? You both were wrong. Why don't one of you, by the way, it's almost always true. There's almost always some fault on both sides. Almost always. And why don't you just admit where you're wrong? One of you, why don't you do it? She's laying there dying. She reaches up and grabs the husband's hand. She grabs her son's hand. And she starts pulling them like this. And they start resisting. And she says, you know how weak I am. You know I'm dying. Don't fight me. This is my last desire on the face of this earth. And as she lays there dying, she takes the father's hand and the son's hand and brings them across her chest like this. And the father looks at the son and says, "Son, I was wrong." And the son looked at his dad and said, "I was wrong too, Dad." And what she could not accomplish in life, she accomplished in death. Why? Because she had both of them in her heart. A husband and wife are fighting. Who can help? Somebody, maybe their in-laws, if they have them both in their hearts. Now, notice the command here. It is a command to us today. Oh, you Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you. Our heart is enlarged. What is the command? Be ye also enlarged. You need to open up your heart to me, Paul says. How does a church grow larger anyway? Preacher, you've studied church growth. I've studied church growth. There's all kinds of things. There's all these seminars out there about church growth. But let me tell you, I think you'll agree with me. It really comes down to this. How does a church grow larger? Enough people let their hearts grow big enough to take in more and more people. Did you hear that? That's how church grows. Enough people. Could I ask you, that stranger that walks in here today, in the 11 o'clock hour that you've never seen before, or maybe you did see him before and you didn't like him, is your heart big enough? Can your heart enlarge enough to take that person in today? Will you just sit on the other side of the church and say, "Oh, they're a visitor," and the pastor will greet them and the assistant pastor will greet them? Or will your heart be big enough to take in those people? Now, let me tell you, usually those people who come in are people with problems. They are almost always people with a past. Anybody here got anything in your past you wish wasn't there? They are people with failures. They are people with difficulties. They are people with warts and wants. What are the symbols again? The open mouth and the enlarged heart. One of the most important characteristics of a man or a woman of God full of true love is that when they run into problems with somebody, they do not cut off the communication. Communication is the lifeblood of the relationship. They try to communicate even more. Did you know that is the whole reason for this book that we call 2 Corinthians? On his second missionary journey, Paul had spent a year and a half in Acts chapter 18 establishing the church at Corinth. He won Jews and Greeks and Gentiles to Christ. And no sooner does he leave there than they get divided 4 different ways. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Christ. False teachers came in. Terrible immorality surfaced in their midst. Does Paul give up on them? No, he writes the letter that we call 1 Corinthians. And actually, he was pretty tough in that letter. I mean, he really let them have it. I'm going to take a little break here so I don't keep sniffing all the way through this, hopefully, all right? So anyway, did it solve their problems? Well, yes it did. No, it didn't. Some of the things Paul wrote them about, they listened to, but some people just got angry at Paul. They attacked him and even falsely accused him. Now, what does Paul do? Does he say, "I am done with you"? No. He communicates more than ever before. Instead of cutting off communication, he communicates more than ever before. Now, when I was first formulating this message, I thought to myself, how much did Paul communicate with the church at Corinth? This is the church that he had the most problems with. So I just took the Bible that I was studying with at that time, and different Bibles would be different here, and different Different books of the Bible have different length chapters and all that, but basically the number of pages in a book, that's basically it. So anyway, I flipped through, and in the Bible I was looking at, Paul wrote the church at Rome, 14 pages. He wrote the church at Galatia, 5 pages. He wrote the church at Ephesus, 5 pages. He wrote the church at Philippi, 3.5 pages. That was the church that brought him the most joy, 3.5 pages. He wrote the church at Colossae, 3 pages. He wrote the church at Thessalonica, 5 pages. And the church at Corinth, the church that gave him the most grief, that gave him the most problems, that accused him, falsely accused him, attacked him, 22 pages. He would not, no matter what happened, he would not give up on them. Our attitude ought to be this: as long as there is life, there is hope. Notice that. Look at that, would you please? He wrote Galatia, Ephesus, Philippi, Colossae, and Thessalonica. You put them all together, it's 21.5 pages. 5 different churches, and the church that gave him the most grief, he wrote more than. Now, I said that they gave him grief. I'm going to, real quickly, I could spend an hour doing this, but I'm just going to do it in 1 minute or two, all right? How did they attack him? They said his letters are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech is contemptible. In other words, Paul is a lousy preacher. He gave a bold answer. Though I be rude in speech, yet not in knowledge. I might be a poor speaker, at least I know what I'm talking about. What good is eloquent ignorance anyway? He was criticized more after his first letter than before. He was not able to get there. He told them he was coming. And then there were things that happened where he could not get there. And they accused him of not being serious and spiritual, of being fickle and double-tongued. Did I use lightness, Paul said? Do I purpose according to the flesh that there should be yea, yea, and nay, nay? And they questioned his right to even come and preach. And he says, here it is. He's explaining here why he couldn't get there. We were pressed out of measure. We despaired even of life. And then they questioned his right to even come and preach. And he said, do we really need epistles or letters of commendation to show up? You are our letters written in our heart. They said he was proud and boastful, maybe even a little bit crazy beside ourselves. They said he couldn't be a man of God because he wouldn't take any support from them. I've preached to you the gospel of God freely. And then he says they accuse him of being crafty and deceitful, that though he said he didn't take any support from them, surely he figured out some way to do it that they didn't know about. He can't win. Now, if you'd written a letter to help somebody and then found out after you wrote it they made all these accusations against you, what would your response be? The typical human response is, I'm done with them. Paul looked at the positive side. Before, there were 4 divisions in the church. Now there are only 2, those for Paul and against Paul. We're making headway. O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you. We've got an open mouth. We've got an enlarged heart. Now for a recompense in the same, I speak as unto my children, be ye also enlarged. The solution to problems is almost always communication. Almost never will you solve a problem without communication. Divisions come, and sometimes divisions stay because somebody no longer loves enough to communicate. Divorce often comes as a result of somebody no longer caring or loving enough to continue to communicate. I'm just done with this. I'm just totally done with it. I'm walking away. When does divorce happen? I had somebody say to me several years ago, they said, what is the number one cause, in your opinion, of divorce? And I said, it's really this. Whenever either party says, I'm done, and they walk away. It could be at any stage in the relationship. Maybe the problems are big. Maybe they're not big. It's whenever either one of them says, I'm done, and they stop communicating and they walk out. That is the biggest single cause of divorce. You could have all kinds of problems in a marriage. I have never seen any problem that could not be worked out if the people would keep communicating. I've never seen it yet. And so if you've got these people and they will just keep communicating. And the door, I'm going to skip a couple of things here to save a little bit of time here. But never shut the other person out. Keep on communicating. And there was, I'm not to the end of my message, but there was that lady and her husband. They were having trouble communicating. And they wound up at this seminar with this communications expert. And he was an expert in, he's speaking on effective listening. And then he says, could you please divide up in pairs? He pointed right at my husband and me and said, we will start here. And then he continued, for 90 seconds, I want one of you to tell your partner about something that's been bothering you. The other person is to remain completely silent. Then we'll repeat the exercise the other way around. My husband shrugged and I said, you first. And the speaker started his stopwatch and my husband started. Honey, I've been worried about Meredith. She's in a different school with new friends. I know she has to take PE every day and she doesn't like it. I keep trying to talk to her about it, but I'm just not reaching her. He paused for a moment. Meredith's not the only one I'm having trouble reaching. Debbie, I think you tune me out. Sharing my life and thoughts with you is important, yet a lot of the time it feels like you're on autopilot. You may think you're hearing me, but you're not. Not really. I was squirming inside, but the 90 seconds were not up. He continued, his eyes focused on mine. I want us to do better with Meredith and with each other. Maybe I can go jogging with her or give her some pointers to help her get more comfortable with PE. As for you and me, and the speaker said, time, switch. I took a deep breath, she said. Alan, you're right. I get so busy with all the things I'm doing that even though I think I'm listening, I'm not always concentrating. I care about you, your work, even the little details. I know you care about me. Maybe we all need to try something different with each other, something more like what we're doing right now. And I heard the speaker say, time's up. And my husband and I stared at each other for a moment, stunned at what had just happened. We both said what was on our minds without distraction or interruption, and we had both listened. And then the leader said this, you can clear up many misunderstandings in the office and at home just by taking the time to carefully listen. That exercise took 3 minutes, but you'll have to admit that it was a pretty good use of time. Driving back home, Alan and I determined to put some new rules into practice. No TV running in the background all the time. Dinner would be a family event. We would not bring a newspaper to dinner. We would not bring a cell phone to dinner. We will sit at the dinner table and look each other in the eyes and talk to each other. By the way, if you're not doing that, you don't have a happy family. Mealtime. I have a whole message where I talk about how important mealtime is for a family. And every time you have a meal together, you're essentially signing a covenant of peace with those that you're sharing that meal. And so when the family, a minimum of once a day, sits down around the table together, hold hands and pray together, and then share the meal together, look at each other and communicate with each other. Studies have shown that teenagers will say, it is the most meaningful thing in their life to be able to sit at a table and eat a meal without distraction or interruption. And studies have shown it is one of the top things that will keep problems down in families and solve problems between parents and their teenagers. And that lady wound up by saying, I began to pray and thank God that He was listening to me all the time. Now, the door. Have you ever, there's exit. Look, there's an exit sign there, exit sign. There's exit signs all over the place here. And on every door in this auditorium, there is an automatic closer. All right? It will, you just hold it, there, and then you let it go. It will close. The door marked communication has an automatic closer on it, and that automatic closer is called time. If you just wait long enough and don't communicate with somebody, then the door of communication will just automatically close completely all on its own. You have to keep the lines of communication on. Skip a couple other things here to save a moment of time. I've got this little cartoon from, I think this is the 1980s. You've got this little old lady, and she's looking around the corner at her husband sitting in front of the TV set with his newspaper in his hand, and she's saying this: you have the right to put down, this is Miranda's warning right. You have the right to put down the paper and turn off the TV and engage in conversation. And if you refuse this right, everything you don't say will be held against you for the rest of your miserable life. Many, many times we've counseled with the parents of a rebellious teenager or young adults. I've seen situations where they had to cut him off from the rest of the children, but I will say to the parents, you don't cut him off. You continue to visit him. You continue to write him. You continue to call him. You keep the lines of communication open, because those lines of communication that you keep open between you and that rebellious or problem son or daughter is his road to come back to you and to God. And if that line of communication is not kept open, he will probably never find his way back. Somebody said, read this with me, would you please, everybody? If you really love somebody, you need to tell them, I love you a lot, because it's really easy to forget, and we really tend to forget. I heard read this story years ago. After the divorce, a teenage daughter became increasingly rebellious, and it culminated late one night when the police called to tell her she had to come to the police station to pick up her daughter, who was arrested for drunk driving. They didn't speak till the next afternoon, and Mom broke the tension by giving her daughter a small gift-wrap box. The daughter nonchalantly opened it and found a little rock inside, rolled her eyes and said, "Cute, Mom, what's this for?" And Mom said, "Here's the card." The daughter took the card out of the envelope and read it. Tears started to trickle down her cheeks. She got up, gave her mom a big hug as the card fell on the floor, and on the card were these words: This rock is more than 6,000 years old, and that's how long it'll take before I give up on you. I talked to some parents who were having problems with a 16-year-old second-born daughter. They let her go to her lost grandparents' house for 2 weeks, and those grandparents mocked the beliefs and standards of the parents. And they said, "What in the world do we do?" And I said, "You know what? You can't let her go to their house again, but you must try to not shut those grandparents out." Say the 3 words, everybody. Don't stop communicating. You do whatever you can. You go see those grandparents yourself. You take her with you. They are grandparents. You don't cut them off. I'm thinking of a family from Pennsylvania that had a rebellious 17-year-old son, and he went to live with his grandparents for a year, and in that year's time, the boy got steadily worse. And they said, "He won't text us. He won't email us. He won't take a telephone call from us. We can't do anything to contact him. He's our son. What do we do?" And I said, every week you send him a postcard. The thing about a postcard is you can write on the outside of it, and people have to read it before they can throw it away. If it's a letter, maybe they can throw it away just from seeing your handwriting on the outside. If it's a postcard that you mail on a regular basis, I'm just saying, you don't stop communicating. You keep the lines of communication open. You keep sending it. You don't do it. Now, watching my time here. I'll wind up with this story. I'm thinking of another family, had a rebellious older teenager. They were really trying to reach him. And the father had a real problem with anger. And he knew he had a problem with anger. And he had done what I told them to do. They got my anger series. They started watching one every week and trying to deal with it. And he had already gone through the whole anger series. And he still got a problem with anger. We told him to start over again. We told him watch him every day or every other day with the family till you really get victory over your anger. But the anger had virtually destroyed the relationship between him and his older teenage son. And finally we said to him, take a piece of wrapped candy, unwrap the candy, put a little note inside that says, please forgive me for my anger. Close it, put it on his dresser. The next day another piece of candy that says, I love you, son. The next day, I'm sorry I failed you, son. The next day, can you please forgive me, son? The next day, I missed the fellowship with you, son. The next day, your mom and I really care about you. And the next day, I'm trying to change. Please pray for me. The next day, I'm praying for you lots. I love you so much. You know what that boy did? This did not surprise me at all. That boy kept every single one of those notes. You know why? Because even a rebel hungers for the acceptance and praise of his father. And it's built into human life for him to want a relationship with his father. And one day the son decided, maybe I can communicate with my dad and tell him where and when he lost my heart. So the son said to his dad, Dad, would you like to know where and how you lost my heart? And the dad said, yes, I would. And the son said, well, do you remember this particular time? We were at this place. You remember what happened there? And the dad said, son, that is not the way it was. This is what really happened, and you just don't remember it right. And the son went to his room, reached into his drawer, pulled out every one of those notes, and threw them into the trash can. Anger cuts off communication. Anger destroys communication. You cannot let anger get in your life and stay in your life. It will destroy communication, and you don't want to stop communicating. 3 words and I'm done. Everybody read them, please, all together. Don't stop communicating. Father, help us to realize how important this truth is and apply it to our family, our home, our relationships. In Jesus' name, amen. Pastor.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Davis. All right, this morning, if you have a bulletin, we'll change a little bit. Choir, you are not singing this morning. We had you listed as singing today. You're not singing today.